they know the monster has a challenge rating of like 16, and their group of 4 players, they're all 8th level, so they know that fighting this monster is a bad idea, and they're thinking, how do I how do I convince my fellow players we should not have this fight with this monster without flat out saying like, guys, I saw his stat block in the monster manual. He's going to destroy us. Um, Players, you should metagame, at least in a particular kind of way. And Dungeon Masters, I think that you should take the time to define and encourage this particular type of metagaming to improve the games at your table. Welcome to Adventure Guild, a place for people who absolutely love the game of Dungeons and Dragons. Here we geek out on conversations about how to elevate and expand our beloved game. Let's get into metagaming. Something that's generally looked down upon at many tables. It's embraced at some. But what is it? Maybe you've heard about it, maybe you haven't. Well, metagaming basically rests on the idea that we're playing a role playing game, and you as a player know things that your character that you are role playing wouldn't necessarily know. So you have what you know as a player, what we call player knowledge, and then you have what your character would know, so character knowledge. And there should be a line down the middle, because what metagaming is the idea that you take something that you as a player know, and then you use that player knowledge and you play your character as if they know that as well. You use this player knowledge to get some advantage for your character. You use it to essentially let them know something they shouldn't know. A real basic example of it is sometimes when you're sitting around a gaming table, you're looking down on a battle mat where all the miniatures or tokens are arrayed, and you have this 360-degree unobstructed view of the battlefield, which really your character wouldn't have that bird's eye view. And maybe you as a player, you can see that down this winding hallway, there's a band of hobgoblins that are making their way down the hallway towards the room. The DM hasn't mentioned them yet. You as a player know those guys are about to join the battle, but your character wouldn't know that. And, generally in a role playing game, to make sure that we are actually role playing, we don't want to let our player knowledge inform our character knowledge, because that is essentially what metagaming is. But there's a flip side to it. You've got player knowledge. What does your player know that your character wouldn't know? But you've also got character knowledge. Things that your character would know quite well, but you as a player, not being someone who has come up in a fantasy world, living in the realities of this setting, you wouldn't know as a player. So what am I driving at? What kind of metagaming do I think needs to be encouraged to improve the game of Dungeons and Dragons? We're going to jump right into it. Guys, like and subscribe if you get a moment, and let's get into metagaming. Think of the realities of growing up in a world where monsters are real. Your characters grew up in such a world where things really do go bump in the night. The ghosts of ancient empires still haunt the ruins they once ruled over. Vampires are real. Rival tribes of warlike humanoids have been competing with elves and dwarves and men since the dawn of time. And the average person probably wouldn't go off into those remote mountains, because there are giants up there and dragons, like for reals. Your characters were raised under threats that you and I can only imagine in a world where monsters roam. Sentient creatures out there that have the intention of enslaving, stealing from, perhaps even completely eradicating their people. You can imagine that by the age of 18, the average would be adventurer would know several people who have seen actual monsters, maybe even several people who have fought with monsters or been taken by monsters. The average farmer would be a fool not to know a lot about the tactics and capabilities of the goblin tribes that have been raiding his lands since the time of his great grandfather. The average town constable would know quite a bit about shapeshifters and probably have some really interesting tricks in order to detect them. The average town person might know the difference between a wraith and a ghost and a specter if their town had had a history of hauntings. Anyone in a Dungeons and Dragons world would have grown up swimming in real first-hand accounts of monsters, what they can do, how they act, how they can be defeated, and if they should even be fought in the first place. The story, the idea of monsters as a reality, would be one of the most important facts, one of the most unavoidable topics of conversation within a game world. It would just be everywhere. Now, I'm not saying there wouldn't be a lot of mystery around monsters still. That's part of the fun of the game. There would be a long list of monsters that your PCs know absolutely nothing about. But what I am driving at is that in any given region, there would also be quite a few monsters that even the common people, and especially authorities, know tons about. Um, how else could they survive if they didn't have that knowledge? And how much more so the people in charge of things, how much more so protectors of the realms or anyone aspiring to become an adventurer. Um, but it goes even deeper than this, I think, because not only did your character grow up under the shadow of monsters as a reality, your character's culture evolved under that reality. The monsters that have been hunting and competing against your people for hundreds, even thousands of years are embedded in your people's identity. Um, those monsters have fueled fairy tales and legends that they're not just full of these fantastical accounts, they're also full of real practical knowledge that any would-be monster hunters would be extremely keen to pick up upon. Cultures become obsessed with their enemies, and your character's cultures would become obsessed with theirs. If there's one thing I know about humanity, and I think it probably applies to other sentient races like dwarves and elves, is that there are always a number of us that have an insatiable curiosity, that are willing to risk anything to see what's over the next hill. And we are even more driven to learn about the things that are potentially dangerous to us. We are quite interested and maybe even obsessed about safety and defense and knowledge about our enemies. And the amount of energy that any culture would devote to learning about one's enemies would be huge. Um, the monsters of the local region would be a common topic. There would be just books, piles of books written about them, and mountains of anecdotal information. And all of that would be there. That would be the soup that your player characters grew up in. And so they would know quite a bit, probably quite a bit more than you. Players know quite a bit about monsters. They've been through different campaigns, different one-shots, and they've got all this hard-earned knowledge about the game. If only they could use it with a good conscience. But that's metagaming, right? And that's bad, right? Pretty much always, so we shouldn't do that. So you don't want to metagame. Your character wouldn't know the things you know as a player, so you've got to awkwardly play dumb. I've seen this many times at my table. Players know exactly what weakness there is with a specific monster, or they just have a general piece of knowledge about it, like the fact it's got advantage on spell saving throws, or maybe it's got a really high armor class. Um, or they might have like a really meta piece of information, like say they know the monster has a challenge rating of like 16, and they're a group of 4 players, they're all 8th level, so they know that fighting this monster is a bad idea, and they're thinking, how do I how do I convince my fellow players we should not have this fight with this monster without flat out saying like, guys, I saw his stat block in the monster manual, he's going to destroy us. Um it's really awkward when you as a player are worried and like you really think one of your fellow players is about to die because they don't know something about a monster and you do. Um, you you feel like you need to say something, but are you allowed to say it? Would your character know it? You sure would want them to, so you could save the day with this amazing piece of knowledge, but you don't want to metagame. Um, Players have to do this awkward dance when this happens, and it can play out in several ways. I've seen I've seen I've seen players just kind of flat out state like, "Oh, I know about this monster DM, but I'm not gonna metagame. I just want to say like I know some stuff about him, but like I'm not gonna metagame." So they basically choose to play dumb, and they play really really dumb. Like I've seen players like literally do the worst thing possible in a combat with a monster that they've fought before with some other character. Like they're just trying to prove the fact that they're not metagaming by doing something ridiculously suboptimal. And then conversely, I've had players that pretend they're not metagaming, but I'm watching what they're doing, and they're doing like something bizarrely optimal, but they won't even bring it up, and it's kind of cute, but it's like I see it happening and I'm like, oh, you know about this. um I've had people admit that they know what the monster can do, and then they say they're not going to metagame, but then it's obvious they are. And then, I've also had players that just straight up say like, hey, Jeff knows a lot about this monster, but I understand that Calidor probably doesn't. Like, what would Calidor know about Minotaurs? And that's probably the best way I've seen it handled. Um, but in all of these cases, all of these moments are awkward, to me at least, and they break the immersion. We often decry metagaming. Um, we decry metagaming as something that brings us out of immersion, but here it's actually trying to avoid metagaming that is throwing our players in this odd state of mind. Like, does my player know what I know? And like, now it really matters. Do I say something? Do I not say something? That actually breaks the immersion. Um, we really want to use the things that we've learned as players to succeed in the game, but we're being forced to awkwardly pretend we don't know better. Um, it's really hard to do. It rips us right out of the immersion. We can we can try and figure out like how to juggle these two people in our mind, like this player that knows and this character that we really don't want to die, by the way, that's not supposed to know. Um, so how do we know, after all, what our character knows? Like, do they know? Should they know? Would they know? Who gets to say? Well, I think the player. I think the player should get to say. when it comes to monsters and metagaming, the assumption is our characters would not know the things we know as players. But I disagree. It's the other way around. Our characters would actually know more about the monsters of their world than we know. And so I think it's open season on monster knowledge. I think all the information that we've learned as players, that you guys have learned as players, I think you should be allowed to voice that through your character. Bring all that knowledge to the table and soak it, use it, squeeze it for everything it's worth. And if that's metagaming, and I'm not sure that it actually is, but if it is, I'm for it. I think us dungeon masters need to talk to our players about this. Tell them it is okay to metagame about monster knowledge. And in fact, it's not really metagaming, is it? If we agree ahead of time that our characters know at least as much about the monsters as our players do, and we just take that as a baseline assumption into the campaign world, and we allow that to be okay, and we just remove all that awkwardness of players having to juggle two things in their head at once, the player that knows versus the character that maybe doesn't know but maybe should know, but maybe if it's a terrible circumstance they should just act like they know so someone in the party doesn't get killed. Let's tell our players to take the knowledge they've earned through all those games and all those years of role playing and bring it into their character, bring it through their character with role playing. I once had a player who was playing a sort of monster hunter. And in the campaign, by using True Sight, he had figured out that the town mayor was actually a demon that was masquerading. And that night, the group had a conversation about what to do about it at the local tavern. At some point in the conversation, this player, he goes into character, and this particular player knew a lot about demons from past gaming experience and from novels and stuff like that. And he goes into this amazing bit of role playing where his character just expositions about demons, about what it really means to face them, about what it means that one is here in this town, about their vulnerabilities, about the horrors that they inflict upon the world, and about how they can be best dealt with. And it was just this amazing moment of role playing where this player, instead of agonizing about what his character would know and what he should and shouldn't say, he just brought all that player knowledge. He just brought it through his character. It was really cool, and it was one of the things that really changed the way that I think about this. Maybe you as a player know that a wraith's attack, if it takes a player character to 0 hit points, they are dead. There's no death saving throw. It is just death if a wraith takes you to 0 hit points. And that's really scary. And your group is about to take on some wraiths. And so, through your character, it's your turn. Your fighter turns to the group and he says, "Listen, my uncle told me about these apparitions a long time ago. If they bring you down, there's no getting up. No bomb, no bandage, no potion, no minor magic can help you. Only magic which can bring the dead back can get you back on your feet, and we don't have that. If these things start hitting you hard and you start to swoon, run to the back. Let someone else take the hits. And everyone, we need to be prepared to run if we have to. Courage buys us nothing here. We just have to get through this." Maybe your player, maybe you know something about trolls and 3 trolls just came creeping out of the swamp. Initiative has been rolled. It's your turn. And maybe you know that trolls regenerate really fast unless they take fire damage every round. And so when it's your turn, you turn to the other players and you say, "Trolls used to attack the walls of my village. We would dump lamp oil on them. You can wound them, but the wounds heal almost as fast as you can dish out the damage. But if you burn the wounds, they don't heal. So you have to keep hitting them with fire or they don't stay down. So we can hold the front line, but you guys, you need to hit them with fire every round until they are down, or they will just keep getting up and we will be supper." Players, talk to your DM about the fact that you want to write the things that you know about monsters into your character's backstory and let those things come out in role playing. You're a citizen of a very dangerous world, an adventurer and a monster hunter. Ask your DM if it's all right to role play that knowledge and see if your dungeon master will let you play smart instead of playing dumb. It's way more fun, not just to get a leg up in combats, but to also reinforce the idea of monsters in the world, and also to create these really cool moments of role playing during fights and in those tense moments before a fight is about to break out when the players are planning. And, to dungeon masters, like, let's tell our players that they grew up in a world full of monsters and that they can just take this baseline assumption that their characters know at least as much as they do, and that they can role play that they can use that knowledge, that they can wield that knowledge, not just not just shamelessly, but proud. Be proud of what they've learned through all those years of playing role-playing games and fighting monsters as different characters around different tables. As long as they are willing to role play it and put a cool spin on it, let's start a new tradition where players feel proud and useful about the knowledge that they've earned over their career as players, and they get to bring that out in the game, actually through their characters. Let's start a tradition where experienced players have the option to play experienced characters.